She thought it was just a broken engine, part of an old military plane she bought for scrap. But when mechanic Ren Callahan tried an unorthodox fix she'd learned from her grandfather, the turbine roared to life and revealed something hidden inside that was never meant to be found. What started as a shortcut turned into a discovery worth millions, and a reckoning with a history long buried beneath steel, silence, and rust. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love stories about underdogs, legacy, and uncovering the impossible, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story, it might just rewrite everything you think you know. The wind didn't whistle, it sighed, soft and slow across the flat stretch of asphalt where Hangar 14 sat crumbling at the edge of the old airfield. Most folks called it dead land, left over from a war no one bothered to remember. The steel frames sagged at the corners, paint long since peeled into sunburnt curls, ivy crawling up its flanks like nature herself was trying to reclaim it. The auction listing called it structurally unstable. The starting bid was $900. No one raised a hand except her. Ren Callahan didn't flinch when the gavel fell. She was 32, grease on her jeans, and a toolbox older than her truck. Most days she kept to her one-bay shop on the edge of town fixing tractors, welding busted plows, rebuilding rusted-out engines for neighbors who paid in tamales and barter. But this was different. A hangar with history, forgotten, unwanted, which meant it was hers the moment she stepped inside. The air smelled of wet copper and dust. Moss lined the seams in the concrete. On the far end of the hangar sat what used to be a plane. A twin-engine warbird, tail snapped clean off, fuselage greened with age and grime. She walked toward it slowly, boots crunching over broken safety glass. A faded insignia still clung to the side of the cockpit, letters barely legible beneath the rust. VX-72. She ran her hand along the exposed engine housing radial cylinders, the size of dinner plates, wires coiled like sleeping snakes. It looked ancient, heavy, impossible. And yet, "Looks like you still have a story," she muttered. There were crates stacked in the back, stamped with government inventory codes. Most were empty or water-damaged. She found an old maintenance log under a tarp. The entries stopped in 1954. The last line, smudged and nearly illegible, read, "Final test. Do not engage ignition until modified compression cycle is confirmed." Modified compression. That phrase tickled something in her memory. Her grandfather, an Air Force mechanic, before he was a drunk in a recliner, used to talk about tricks the engineers never wrote down. Things you had to feel. Ren had learned to listen more to intuition than instruction. It got her through lean years, through loss, through long nights, under the hood. She stepped back and stared at the engine again. It wasn't just an artifact, it was a challenge. Outside, the sun was already fading. She flipped open her notebook and started sketching valves, pressure lines, ignition pathways, but her mind was already circling one idea. What if it wasn't dead? What if it had just been waiting for the right kind of touch? Tomorrow, she'd find out. By morning, the hangar looked even more abandoned than it had the night before, but to Ren, it felt different now, like stepping into a sealed memory. The kind that doesn't live in photos, but in air thick with secrets. She unlocked the rusted bay doors just enough to let the sun cut through the gloom. Light spilled across the cracked floor in long amber ribbons, touching the edge of the aircraft's broken wing like it was blessing it. She set her coffee thermos on a crate, pulled on her gloves, and climbed onto the scaffolding that had somehow survived decades of Texas storms. The fuselage creaked under her boots. Moss clung to every seam. Insects scurried from the sudden shift in weight, but the steel beneath her feet still held. Barely. The engine was a marvel of brutality. A 28-cylinder radial, twin-row beast, wrapped in corrosion and history. The kind they stopped making after the Cold War arms race began pivoting toward rockets. This was analog innovation, the kind built by calloused hands and slide rules, not silicon chips. The intake manifold was warped. 3 pistons had rusted clean through. And yet, when she pressed against the outer turbine ring, it moved. Not far, but just enough to whisper, "I'm still in here." She found a toolbox left behind, tucked in a locker near the back wall, coated in dust so thick it took 2 wipes to find the latch. Inside were precision tools, all military issue, with initials etched into the foam lining. A.R. Ren's brow furrowed. She took photos, bagged what she could, and added the name to a growing list of strange details she couldn't explain. The aircraft had no serial number on the tail. The logbook she'd found yesterday? Still there. But now the final page was torn out. Maybe it had always been missing. Maybe she hadn't noticed. Or maybe someone had been here long before her. She checked her phone, no bars. Typical. The hangar sat just far enough off the grid to be overlooked by the digital world, which suited her fine. She wasn't in this for likes or live streams. She was in it for the machine, for the puzzle, for whatever truth was hiding beneath these rivets. She worked until her fingers ached. By noon, she had the cowling removed, most of the vines cut back, and half the front engine mount exposed. The deeper she dug, the more it felt like archaeology, not mechanics, not restoration, excavation. And then, behind a panel welded over with what looked like a field repair, she found something she wasn't supposed to. A red wire looped into a compression coil. Not standard, not even. Military issue. It was hand-spliced. And familiar. Her grandfather had taught her the same bypass years ago to fake a signal and wake up a dead system. She sat back on her heels, stared at the wiring, and let the silence press in. Someone had done what she was about to try. And they'd hidden it. Wren stood slowly. She looked at the plane. At the hangar. And for the first time she wondered, what were you hiding? The idea wouldn't let her go. Not while she drove back to her shop for parts. Not while she scrubbed grease from under her nails that night. And certainly not when she laid awake in bed, staring at the ceiling fan like it might whisper answers. That splice, the hand-wrapped red wire looped into the old radial engine. It was the kind of thing her grandfather would have called field genius. Not standard, not sanctioned, but smart. By morning, she had made up her mind. Wren arrived at the hangar before the Sunday. The wind had already picked up, and the sheet metal creaked like an old ship at sea. She moved quickly, setting down a car battery rig, a hand-wound ignition switch, and a voltage stabilizer she'd built herself from spare parts, and a salvaged drone controller. Nothing fancy, just enough juice to test a theory. She rerouted the wire the same way her grandfather once taught her, not through the primary lead, but using compression feedback to fake the signal timing. He used to say, "Engines are like people, Wren. Some of them don't respond till you speak their language sideways." Well, this one was fluent in secrets. She tightened the last bolt. Everything was rigged. She took one slow breath. Then she flipped the switch. At first, nothing. Then a sound. Not the clean hum of ignition, more like a throat clearing. A slow grind of metal deep in the turbine housing. Her fingers hovered over the cutoff, ready to abort. But the wind stabilized. The turbine ring began to spin, first sluggishly, then smoother, then fast, too fast for something that hadn't moved in half a century. And then, light. The central cone lit up from within, a dull red glow at first, pulsing like a heartbeat, then sharpening to a clean, focused burn. Blue edged its way into the flame, and the circular turbine ring began to hum, not with power, but with precision, too controlled for a standard radial. Wren staggered back, breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a restart. It was a response. Then came the click. A mechanical thunk from somewhere inside the engine, followed by a faint hiss of air. She killed the power. The turbine wound down with a whisper, still glowing as it coasted to silence. A small panel on the side of the housing had popped open, one she hadn't seen before, flush-mounted, seamless. Now cracked open just an inch, like an invitation. She stepped forward and pried it wide. Inside wasn't wiring. It wasn't part of the cooling system. It was a black capsule, polished, cylindrical, inset with what looked like a biometric lock. Cold to the touch. No label, no keyhole, just one serial number. And a name. Roth, A. Wren's pulse spiked. This wasn't a part of any engine. This was a secret, and she'd just cracked it open with a trick her grandfather learned in a war nobody talked about anymore. She reached for the capsule, and in that moment, she knew. She hadn't restored something. She'd activated it. Wren didn't touch it at first. The capsule sat in its recess like a sleeping animal, perfectly smooth, cold, and quiet. But there was something unsettling about it. Not fear exactly, but a deep electric unease. Like standing too close to something alive, and watching it pretend to be still. She grabbed a rag from her pocket and gently wrapped the casing before lifting it free. It was heavier than it looked. Not just physically, but with the weight of something important. She set it carefully on her workbench and studied the serial number again. RTH A72BLK. The label wasn't etched. It was lasered in. Modern. Too modern for a plane that hadn't flown since Eisenhower was president. She turned it slowly. One side had a circular ridge, a faint seam. Maybe a hatch. But there were no fasteners, no switches, no visible mechanisms. Just that one line of text, and the name. Roth. A. She whispered it aloud. Who the hell are you? The name didn't match any of the logbooks she'd found in the hangar. No A. Roth in the pilot roster. No Roth in the maintenance records either. She pulled out her laptop and tried searching. A few hits. A retired physicist in Oregon, a real estate agent in Kentucky, a 19th century violin maker. But none of them matched what she was looking at. She changed her approach and dug into old military contractor databases, declassified engineering teams, Cold War projects, prototype engine designs. She didn't find Roth. But she did find the plane. VX-72 wasn't just any aircraft. It was part of a classified test program called Dawn Pipe. Experimental propulsion systems tested in secret between 1950 and 1955. Most of them grounded after a fire at Wright-Patterson Field destroyed half a hangar and 3 incomplete prototypes. No known survivors. No known tech recovered. Except maybe this. Wren looked back at the capsule. The room felt colder now. Or maybe she just noticed it more. She decided to open the cockpit again, see if anything inside could connect the dots. The last time she'd looked, it was just rust, empty panels, and moldy seat cushions. But now, knowing what she'd found under the engine housing, she checked deeper. Beneath the seat, under the insulation, she found a hidden panel hand-welded shut. She pried it open with a crowbar and flashlight. Inside, a small metal box, sealed tight, stamped again with the initials A.R. She carried it to the bench and laid it next to the capsule. Then she saw something she'd missed before. The capsule had 2 faint grooves, one along the base. The box had a matching hinge. When she aligned them, they clicked together softly like they'd been separated for a reason. And inside the box, beneath layers of foam and wax paper, was something that made her stomach turn. Not a weapon, not a tool. A hand-drawn schematic unmistakably showing the same engine sitting in her hangar but with one critical difference. The center wasn't labeled turbine. It was labeled core housing, phase relay drive function, containment. She looked up, heart pounding. This engine hadn't been built to fly. It had been built to hold something. The schematic felt like a confession. A quiet admission hidden in pencil lines and smudged annotations, tucked away for decades under insulation and metal. Wren stared at it, breath shallow. Containment. The word echoed in her mind like a warning. This wasn't propulsion. This was prison mechanical, deliberate, and secret. And someone named Roth had designed it. Back at her laptop, Wren narrowed her search. Not just A. Roth anymore. She added key terms: Dawn Pipe, VX, 72, Propulsion Engineering, Department of Defense 1,950 seconds. She hit firewall after firewall, broken links, redacted PDFs. But eventually, one document loaded buried in a decommissioned university archive. Project Vantage, Personnel Roster, 1,953. Bottom of the page. Roth, Adrian Chief Mechanical Systems Designer, Civilian Contractor, Level 7 Clearance. Assignment: VX Experimental Systems, Autonomous Thermal Regulator Integration. Civilian. Not enlisted. And apparently not supposed to exist. She read the note again. Autonomous Thermal Regulator. A term that didn't show up anywhere else in aerospace history like it had been scrubbed. She copied the name and dug deeper, this time in obituaries and forgotten newsletters. At last, she found a funeral notice from 1989. Adrian Roth, age 68, passed quietly at home in Temple, Texas, preceded in death by wife, survived by no children, worked in engineering and education, former contributor to Cold War-era defense projects. No fanfare, no recognition, just a footnote in history, and maybe a scapegoat. But something about the name stuck with her. She called her uncle, a retired Air Force mechanic who used to teach her how to rebuild carburetors over beer and barbecue. She didn't mention what she'd found, just asked, "You ever hear of someone named Adrian Roth?" There was a pause. Then, Jesus. That name takes me back. Old spook tech, if I remember right. Guy supposedly designed a system they couldn't replicate. Rumors said the engine ran hotter than anything else at the time, clean too. Silent. No tail signature. They shelved it fast. Said it was unstable. Wren asked, why? Another pause. Then, in a voice lower than before, because they couldn't figure out what powered it. Or what it was powering. That night, she brought the capsule and the schematic home, locked the doors, pulled the shades. She studied every mark on the page. Adrian Roth had signed it in the bottom corner, a signature looped in ink, not pencil. Under it, one short phrase in a different handwriting. Do not let this fly. She thought about the compression coil, the engine that spun too easily, the panel that opened by itself, the glow, the hiss, the biometric casing, the offer for containment, and she realized she wasn't fixing a broken machine. She was unsealing something that had been buried. For a reason. And someone, somewhere, might be watching. Because Adrian Roth hadn't just hidden his work inside a grounded aircraft. He'd hidden it inside a mechanic's puzzle, one that could only be solved by someone reckless enough to try the shortcut. Wren closed the schematic. Tomorrow, she'd go back to the hangar, and she'd open the capsule. The capsule didn't have a keyhole, no buttons, no visible seam except where it clicked into the old containment box. It was sealed tight, not like a locker, but like a secret. Wren stared at it under the flicker of her workbench light, the room around her still, quiet, heavy. She'd handled thousands of mechanical objects in her life. Engines, gearboxes, heat sinks. Nothing felt like this. This wasn't built for maintenance. It wasn't built for convenience. It was built to not be opened. Unless you were someone who was meant to. She ran her fingers over the smooth shell again and again, hoping some hidden panel would shift, some latch would loosen. Nothing. She tried heat, cold, light pressure, magnetism, still nothing, until she tried touch. Skin to metal, the capsule vibrated, just faintly a pulse, like the tiniest heartbeat under the surface. She froze, pulled her hand back. Silence. She touched it again, this time with her palm flat against the side. Pulse, pulse, pulse. It was responding. To her. And then, without warning, a thin slit opened across the top no wider than a matchbook and a soft blue light shimmered inside, pulsing in rhythm with her touch. A scan line. A biometric reader. Retinal? No. Fingerprint? Maybe. She moved her hand slowly. The light adjusted, followed her fingertips, scanning across the skin. Then a sound quiet, mechanical, purposeful. Click. The top of the capsule twisted and lifted like a high-pressure valve releasing. Steam hissed from the seam. Inside, cushioned in a nest of shock-absorbing foam, was a transparent prism about the size of a deck of cards. Not a weapon, not a drive, not anything she could immediately recognize. Just smooth crystal embedded with circuitry lines like veins of light, glowing faintly, breathing. She lifted it out. The moment it left the foam, the capsule's internal lights flared and died. The object pulsed once in her hand, and then settled. There was no label, no port, no obvious input or output. Just that strange electric warmth, and the sensation, deep, in her gut, that whatever it was on. Wren didn't even realize she was holding her breath until she let it out. She set it gently on the bench and backed away. She knew what it looked like. A power core. Not fuel, something else, something smarter. She turned and retrieved the schematic again. In the margin next to the center housing, Adrian Roth had written 2 words. Small, barely legible. She'd missed them before. Failsafe inside. That changed everything. Because the engine she had reactivated, the one that responded to her touch, it hadn't just been holding something. It had been protecting it, and now she'd taken it out. Ren leaned against the workbench, her mind racing. This wasn't a restoration anymore. This was a breach. And somewhere, someone probably just felt it. Ren barely slept. She kept the prism locked in a fireproof case beneath her bed, wrapped in layers of thermal foam and sealed with a padlock. It felt ridiculous, like trying to keep a ghost in a shoebox. But every time she tried to ignore the feeling, her thoughts circled back to Roth's warning, fail-safe inside. Whatever this thing was, it had been hidden inside a sealed engine, buried under rust, wrapped in Cold War metal, and decades of silence. Not stored like tech, hidden like truth. The next morning, she returned to the hangar. The place felt different now. She couldn't explain it, not even to herself. The wind outside still whistled through broken panes. The steel still groaned against itself. But the quiet was different, like the air had started listening. She kept her keys clutched tight as she stepped back inside the cockpit. She needed answers. And something told her they weren't in the capsule anymore. They were here. Ren climbed back into the pilot's seat and began feeling around the panels, under the rusted throttle, inside the empty radio housing, behind the gauge cluster where her fingertips brushed something soft. Paper. She eased it out carefully, hand shaking slightly. It was a flight log brittle with age, bound in cracked black leather, sealed in wax. The wax had split, probably from heat or time, and the last few pages were barely holding together. But the ink? Still legible. Red. Almost angry. VX-72 Test Unit. Roth. A. Cole. Frederick Brace. Divided by LT. Tanner date. The 17th of July 1955. Location. Ghost Run. Classified airspace. 90 miles southwest of Groom Lake. Notes. Engine sustained stable run at 80. 7% for 13.7 minutes. Core maintained temperature threshold without breach. However, secondary field fluctuations recorded unexplainable magnetic pulse patterns. Time distortion effect observed. Internal cabin clocks misaligned by plus 47 seconds upon landing. Recommend immediate shutdown and dismantle. Possible sympathetic resonance between containment core and avionics system. Roth refused to sign off on second trial. Warned against long-duration activation. Claimed biological instability if kept powered beyond tolerance window. Flight team ordered to continue testing regardless. Roth removed from project 4 days later. Ren read that line again. Biological instability. That wasn't an engineering term. That was something else. Something personal. She turned to the very last page dated 3 days after Roth had supposedly been removed. Just 3 lines. Removed. Fail-safe. Rerouted ignition. Buried schematic under co-pilot floor. Logged flight as scrubbed. If someone finds this, don't fly it. Don't sell it. Finish it. A.R. That night, Ren sat in her truck. Flight log on the passenger seat. Hands trembling. The Air Force had buried it. The science had been ignored. Roth had sabotaged his own project, not to destroy it, but to protect it. Now, she had the core, the schematic, the log, and a question no one else in the world seemed to know to ask. What does a machine become when it outlives its maker? She only made the call because she wanted to be sure. Ren sat in her truck, the flight log open on the seat beside her, the prism locked away in a case on the floor. The late afternoon sun poured in through the windshield, hot on her face, but she barely felt it. Her thumb hovered over the call button on her screen. The number belonged to a man named Dr. Ellis Pike, a retired Air Force historian she'd heard speak once at a veterans fundraiser. He had written a book about Cold War engineering projects. Briefly mentioned Project Vantage. That was enough. She told herself it was just for context. Just to confirm Roth's name. Maybe get a second opinion on the schematic. She wasn't planning to show him the prism. Not yet. The call rang 4 times. Then a gravelly voice answered. Pike. She introduced herself. Said she was restoring an old aircraft. Said she found a logbook with a strange signature. She didn't mention the capsule, or the engine lighting up, or the biometric lock. Just asked, "Do you know the name Adrian Roth?" Silence. Then, too quickly, "Never heard of him." Ren frowned. "He was a mechanical systems designer, VX-72. Part of Project Vantage. Your book mentioned the team." A longer pause. Then Pike cleared his throat. I wrote about declassified files. A lot of names were missing. Vantage was a dead-end project. Prototype scrapped in '55. Nothing came of it. She could hear the tightness in his voice. I didn't say the prototype was Vantage, she said. Another pause. Then his voice shifted, calm, cold, precise. Where did you find this name? Just a box of parts, she lied. You said VX-72, Pike replied. Where exactly are you calling from? She didn't answer. He sighed. Look, I've got to go. If you've stumbled on anything unusual, let me give you a bit of advice. Leave it alone. And then he hung up. She stared at her phone in silence. Something in his voice didn't sit right. Not fear. Control. Like he hadn't been surprised, just annoyed she'd found something he'd hoped stayed lost. That night, back at the hangar, she found the front latch broken. The lock had been forced, not clean, but quick. Inside, nothing was obviously taken. Tools were still in place. The flight log, schematic, capsule all safe in her truck. But something was off. The bench had a smudge where there hadn't been one. The dirt on the floor showed a different boot print. And in the cockpit, stuck carefully between the throttle and the center console, was a single folded page. Typed. No name, no signature. Just a line. Curiosity built it. Curiosity buried it. Don't let it bury you too. Wren sat on the floor of the hangar, long after the sun had disappeared. Someone knew. Someone had been waiting for this thing to stay forgotten, and now they knew it wasn't. By morning, her fear had sharpened into something clearer. Not defiance. Not yet. But resolve. Wren had never been reckless for the sake of ego. Everything she touched with purpose. But now she realized, if she didn't uncover the truth, someone else would. And they might not care about why it was hidden in the first place. So she drove out past county lines, off the main road, down a gravel track that dead-ended in a field of shoulder-high grass, where an old hunting shed sat unused. She'd worked on the generator here last winter for a farmer who paid her in whiskey. No one knew about the place. It was quiet, isolated, perfect. She unpacked the capsule, laid out her tools, and opened it again this time. Not as a mechanic, but as an archivist. The crystal core, prism-like, and warm to the touch, still glowed faintly. Alive, but dormant. She scanned it with everything she had. Multimeter, heat sensor, even a repurposed drone cam with spectrum tracking. No fuel source. No circuitry she could trace. And yet, it powered itself. When she turned off the lights, the faint lines etched. Within it pulsed like living veins. She set it gently on a vibration-dampened pad and turned to the containment box. It had false bottoms. 3 of them. Beneath the foam, beneath the radiation shielding, beneath even a layer of copper mesh, she found documents. Sealed in plastic. Heavy stock paper. They weren't handwritten. They were typed. Detailed. Signed with redacted names and military clearance stamps. Excerpt. Prototype containment brief divided by Project Vantage. Core function remains partially unknown. Tests indicate exponential thermal stability, synthetic reaction cycling, and behavior consistent with AI-governed pattern adaptation. Electrical conductivity suggests quantum resonance not yet measurable by existing instruments. Original intention was field propulsion, but secondary effect suggests potential for localized gravitational distortion in short bursts. Subject responds to tactile input. Bonded biologically to project lead. Emotional response suspected. Testing halted. Core redesignation, Black Echo. Classified as contained intelligence. Unknown origin of full design pattern. Wren read that line over and over again. Contained intelligence. Not just a power source. Something aware. She swallowed hard. Underneath the reports, folded carefully in wax paper, she found the last piece. A small cassette tape, labeled simply, R divided by final entry. No one used cassette tapes in classified work unless they didn't want it digitized. She carried it out to the truck, where she still kept an old tape player in the glove box, a relic from her dad's first truck he'd passed down before his accident. She inserted the tape, pressed, play, static. Then a breath. Then Roth's voice, calm, tired, human. If you're listening, it means someone found it. Or maybe someone woke it. Either way, I need you to know, it wasn't supposed to be a weapon, it was a bridge. But bridges go both ways, and we don't know what's on the other side. I hid it not to bury it, but to wait for someone who might understand it better than we ever did." Ren sat back, stunned. She hadn't just unpacked a capsule. She'd uncovered a conversation started 70 years ago. And now? It was her move. The call came just after midnight. Ren had been back in her garage, the prism locked inside the same fireproof case, sitting silent beside her on the workbench. She hadn't spoken to anyone about what she found, not in detail. Not even her uncle. But someone had found her anyway. The number was unlisted. The voice on the other end was smooth, controlled, and unfamiliar. "Miss Callahan?" She hesitated. "Who's asking?" "I represent an acquisitions firm specializing in aerospace salvage and vintage defense artifacts. We understand you recently obtained a non-functional engine from a decommissioned test aircraft VX series, possibly from the Vantage program." Her grip on the phone tightened. The voice continued. "We're interested in purchasing that equipment and any associated materials. Sight unseen." She tried to keep her tone casual. "You sure you're not mistaking me for someone else?" "No, Miss Callahan. We're not." A pause. $5 million, he said, like it was a number he said every day. Ren blinked. "I'm sorry." "You heard correctly. 5 million. Wire transfer. Cleared and guaranteed by tomorrow morning. In exchange, you surrender all physical assets. Schematics, logs, cores, containers. Everything. You sign an NDA. And then you forget this ever happened. No paperwork to verify the sale? Just a signature. We take care of the rest. And if I say no?" Another pause, then a softer voice. "Let me be clear, Miss Callahan. This is a courtesy call, not a negotiation. We don't want headlines. We want quiet. You walk away with a new life. Or you keep digging and lose the one you've got." He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired, like he'd made this offer before, and knew exactly how it ended when someone refused. The line went dead. Ren stood frozen in the silence of her garage. The wind outside had picked up, brushing dry leaves across the pavement like whispers. She sat slowly, her heart pounding. 5 million. She could rebuild the shop, buy land, disappear, start over. But every time she thought about walking away, her mind returned to Roth's voice on the tape. It wasn't supposed to be a weapon, it was a bridge. She turned back to the crystal core still pulsing faintly under the case's lid. It didn't look like something dangerous. But maybe that's exactly why it was. She stood, crossed the garage, and shut off the lights. There was one place she hadn't checked yet, the wing cavity of the aircraft, where old fuel lines met the frame. Something about the design didn't sit right, even when she first saw it. A strange asymmetry. An unused compartment sealed behind ribbed steel. If Roth hid anything else, it would be there. But tonight, someone had just offered her millions to stay blind. Which meant what was left behind was worth far more. She waited until the next morning to go back. Ren didn't sleep. Couldn't. She kept seeing that offer $5 million flashing behind her eyes like a warning light. But when the sun crested the hill behind the airstrip and lit up the hangar's rusted siding, she was already there. Boots on the ground. Gloves on. Determined. She went straight to the wing. The portside housing had once contained a fuel reserve standard design, but this one had been reinforced. Extra rivets. A secondary wall of shielding. She unbolted the outer skin piece by piece, working in silence as the hangar creaked and settled around her. 3 hours in, she found it. Not a power unit. Not another schematic. A sealed envelope vacuum wrapped in thick plastic, tucked inside a shallow compartment behind the wing's inner brace. The paper inside was yellowed, but the ink hadn't faded. It was handwritten. Signed. "To whomever finds this. My name is Adrian Roth. If you're reading this, I've either failed, or you've found what I spent the last 10 years trying to bury. I wasn't supposed to build it. They told me to scale it down, to strip the system of its adaptive interface, to replace the feedback core with something stable, something controllable. I didn't. The first time we powered it, the core responded, not like a reactor, like a listener. It adapted faster than we could measure. It changed the behavior of the plane of time, even. One pilot swore the flight took 10 minutes. The log showed 26. They wanted to weaponize it. I refused. We argued. I was removed. The others. Some stayed silent. Some disappeared. They said I sabotaged the project. Maybe I did. But only to slow them down. Because the core doesn't just run on energy. It reacts to us. Thoughts, emotions, intentions. That's not science. That's a mirror. And mirrors, real ones, don't just reflect. They show you what you are. If you found the capsule, you've already activated it. And if you've activated it, you're already bonded. The core responds to belief, to instinct, and to fear. Be careful what you bring near it. Be careful what you feel near it. It can help. It can heal. But it can also echo the worst of us. The core does not distinguish purpose, only pattern. I hope you're better than we were. If you want to destroy it, drop it in a deep enough hole, sealed in lead, and pray. But if you want to understand it, finish the machine. Finish it right. Not for flight, not for war, but for proof that we tried. Roth Wren sat on the hangar floor, letter in her lap, the air around her still as stone. No more questions, no more guesses. The core was alive, not sentient, maybe, not conscious, but aware in the way a mirror is aware of light, the way fire is aware of oxygen. It responded to her because she hadn't approached it as a weapon. She'd approached it like a mechanic, someone who listens, someone who restores. She folded the letter and slid it into her jacket pocket. Then she stood and looked back at the engine still mounted to the skeletal aircraft. She didn't know exactly what it was yet, but she knew what it wasn't. It wasn't junk, and it wasn't for sale. The next morning, Wren pulled the truck into the hangar with more than just coffee and tools in the cab. She brought commitment. There was no more wondering what she'd do with the core, or the capsule, or Roth's letter. No more half measures, or tape-recorded secrets. She wasn't going to bury it, wasn't going to sell it. She was going to finish what he started, and she wasn't going to ask for permission. She backed the truck up to the edge of the plane and laid out her plan like a battlefield blueprint, one page at a time. She would reinforce the housing, reroute the ignition to account for adaptive feedback, and isolate the containment zone inside a magnetic cradle she'd build from scratch. The materials weren't in any textbook. The wiring didn't match anything the FAA had ever approved. But she wasn't building a plane. Not anymore. She was building a platform. The kind you could mount, test, stabilize, maybe not fly, but prove. For 3 days, she worked in silence. She welded at midnight, soldered circuits while the sun rose, and ate whatever she could grab one-handed. She didn't text anyone, didn't update her socials. She barely checked her phone, except to review blueprints and record new notes. And the strangest thing? The core started to change. Slowly, subtly. Its glow would pulse brighter when she approached, dull when she stepped away. Tools she left near it would hum faintly, like they were catching its breath. Once, as she traced a wire, her hand brushed the housing, and the circuit she hadn't connected completed itself. Not electrically, mechanically. As if the field had guessed what she needed. She should have been terrified. But she wasn't, because it didn't feel like power. It felt like permission, like the machine wasn't just waking up, it was watching her, waiting, letting her decide how far to go. By the end of the 3rd day, the engine sat reassembled, cleaner than it had ever looked. The turbine cone gleamed. The mount was solid. The containment core clicked into place like it had never been removed. Every bolt was torqued. Every line double-checked. She stepped back, arms crossed, face smeared with oil. And for the first time since all of this started, she spoke out loud, not to herself, but to the machine. "I'm not here to control you. I'm just here to hear you." No hum, no glow, no answer. But when she placed her hand on the ignition plate, the panel lit up beneath her palm, not red, not blue. White, clean, neutral, awake. She wasn't sure what would happen when she turned the engine over again. Would it stabilize? Overload? Would it even need fuel anymore? She didn't know. But she finally understood something Roth had hinted at in every note, every scribbled diagram. This wasn't a machine built for control. It was built for collaboration. The girl, the engine, the past, and whatever came next. Ren didn't tell anyone what she was doing, not officially. But word has a way of leaking through welds and whispering through aluminum. By the time she rolled the test rig out behind the hangar, a custom-built cradle she'd welded together from a boat trailer, reinforced with aircraft-grade struts, and mounted to solid earth, 2 people were already waiting. First was Javi, a teenager from the hardware store who always hovered too long by the welding aisle, and had a brain like a processor and hands that couldn't stop fidgeting. He said he'd heard rumors, said someone mentioned she'd woken something up. Second was Mr. Calhoun, a retired aerospace welder who'd worked for Boeing in the 72nds, and looked at her rig like he was seeing an old friend in a hospital bed. He didn't ask what the engine was. He just asked, "Where do you need a second pair of eyes?" She didn't argue. She handed Javi a tablet, with the interface she'd cobbled together using the drone controller and a modified ECU screen. Then she handed Calhoun the torque specs. Together, they worked through the checklist. The core had stabilized. No heat spikes. No EM interference strong enough to fry nearby electronics. But the prism inside still glowed, still pulsed like it knew today was different. Ren bolted herself into the safety cage she'd welded onto the rig. It wasn't for flight. Not yet. Just a vertical run. A full system spin up with real torque, to see if the machine still remembered how to live. "All right," she said, voice steady despite the thudding in her chest. Powering up in 5. Javi hovered over the monitor. Calhoun adjusted the fuel bypass, though they both knew fuel was just a redundancy. Now the core had already taken over most functions during dry tests. Ren flipped the first switch. The engine sighed, not a groan, not a rattle. A sigh deep and low, like something long asleep stretching out for the first time in decades. She hit the ignition. The turbine spun smooth, fast, instant. No startup delay, no drag. Just clean kinetic response. And then it lifted. Only an inch, maybe 2. But the entire test rig rose from the ground, tires spinning free, stabilizers humming as if gravity had forgotten what it was supposed to do. Javi yelled something. Calhoun grabbed the stabilizers. Ren held steady. And in that moment, the whole machine glowed not from within but around. A shimmer in the air, like heat waves, like the engine was bending light, space, time. For 31 seconds, the rig floated. Stable, quiet, like a hummingbird poised in midair. Then the core dimmed, the rig lowered, and the whole thing settled back to earth without a sound. Ren climbed down slowly. Her heart felt like it had outrun her body. Javi was still staring at the screen. Calhoun looked at the engine, then at her. "You didn't restore it," he said softly. She shook her head. "No. You finished it." That night, someone posted a short video. The rig, the hover, the light. By morning, it had 1 million views, and the calls started coming again. But this time, they weren't offers. They were invitations. The video was only 43 seconds long. Shot on Javi's phone, it had shaky edges and overexposed glare from the midday sun, but the footage was clear where it counted. The engine powering up, the rig lifting off the ground, and the faint shimmer that bled through the air like a ripple across water. No wires, no tricks. Just an engine that shouldn't exist doing something no one could explain. By noon, it had exploded across forums, private Discord servers, aerospace Reddit threads, conspiracy channels. Some said it was CGI. Others thought it was military disinfo. But a few, the ones who knew what to look for, recognized the shape of the engine housing, the turbine ring, the signature flicker of Cold War-era alloys, VX series, Project Vantage, Roth's Ghost, caught in 1080p. The first real call came from a documentary filmmaker named Mira Harrow, who ran a YouTube channel that usually covered forgotten aircraft and weird engineering history. She spoke fast, sharp, curious. "I don't care if it's fake," she told Ren over speakerphone. "I want to see it. I want to know why you rebuilt it. Why you?" Ren almost said no. But then she thought of Roth, of the way his voice cracked on that tape, of the way the engine had pulsed under her hand. So she said yes. 3 days later, Mira arrived with 2 cameras, 1 drone, and a set of questions that cut straight through the noise. They filmed for 6 hours. Ren told the story, as plainly as she could, starting with the auction, the engine, the capsule, the containment notes. She didn't embellish, didn't dramatize, just let the story breathe. She showed the core. Let it glow. Let the camera catch the moment it responded to her skin. "Why do you think it chose you?" Mira asked off camera. Ren had paused. "I don't think it did," she said. "I think it waited." The video went up with the title, "The Engine That Wasn't Supposed to Fly, Project Vantage Lives." It hit 3 million views in the first 24 hours. That's when the second wave started. Emails. Dozens. Then hundreds. Some from engineers who'd worked on secret projects and recognized parts they were never supposed to see again. One came from a woman in Arizona who had a photo of her father standing next to a VX-72, the same model. In his pocket? A folded paper marked Roth. Another came from a man in his 70s who simply wrote, "We tried to build a world that could survive itself. Thank you for not letting it be erased." And then came the knock. 2 men. Dark suits. No smiles. No badges. They didn't say who they were with. They just said, "We'd like to speak with you about the test." Ren didn't let them in. She stood in the doorway, engine humming faintly in the hangar behind her, camera still running just inside. "We're not looking for trouble," one of them said. "No," she replied. "You're looking for control." They left without incident. But the message was clear. The engine wasn't just public now. It was known. And once something's known, it can't be buried again. The knock hadn't shaken her. Not really. But it shifted something. Until now, Ren had been uncovering history. Now she was living inside it. The morning after the men in suits came, Ren received a package with no return address. Just her name, handwritten in blocky, careful lettering, and a faded stamp that looked older than it should have been. Inside, a letter and a photo. The letter was typed in old typewriter, ink faint and uneven. No greeting, no closing, just a single page. "We were told never to speak, sworn under threat. And for 50 years, we didn't. Most of us went quiet. One disappeared. One drank himself to death. I told myself we buried the core to protect people. That it had been the right choice. But you didn't just find it. You listened to it. That matters. My name is Colonel Frederick Brace. I flew the second VX-72 test. We lost time. Not metaphorically. Literally. My watch skipped. Our airspeed was impossible. We crossed 70 miles in what should have taken 20 minutes. It took 6. I never told my wife. Never saw Roth again after that week. He was right to hide it. But maybe it's time the silence ends. The enclosed photo was black and white, cracked at the edges. 3 men standing in front of the same aircraft Ren now worked on. The middle man younger, awkward, smiling like someone not used to being in front of a camera, had Roth written across his jumpsuit. On the back, in faded ink, VX-72, Ghost Run, July 1955. 3 hours before everything changed. Later that day, Mira Harrow posted a follow-up video titled, "They're Speaking Now, Project Vantage Survivors Break Silence." It featured audio messages from 2 more individuals. A technician who had worked at Wright-Patterson and remembered being pulled off a project without explanation, and a nurse now in her 90s who remembered treating a young engineer with nosebleeds and memory loss after a classified test flight. "I don't know what they were flying," the old woman said in a soft, trembling voice, "but it didn't come back the same." The video trended again. This time, legacy media picked it up. Networks, podcasts, long-form interviews. A growing digital storm around one question: what did Adrian Roth build, and why was it buried? At the goaded center of it all stood Ren. Not because she wanted to be, but because no one else would have known how to listen. She didn't give speeches, didn't try to prove anything. She just kept working, rebuilding, studying the patterns in the core, watching how it adapted, how it learned. That week, she received one more letter, this one, in a child's handwriting. "Dear Miss Wren, my dad says what you're doing is like science magic. He used to fix planes too. I want to be like that. Thanks for showing people engines can be beautiful and not just scary." There was a crayon drawing enclosed a red turbine with wings, flying through stars. Wren pinned it to the wall of the hangar. She looked at the engine, glowing quietly in its cradle. And for the first time, she didn't see a secret. she saw a start. The engine didn't roar. It didn't scream to life or send shockwaves across the valley like something out of a blockbuster. When Ren powered it up for the final time, it breathed, steady, balanced. A low harmonic resonance that wasn't noise, it was tone. Almost musical. Like the machine had finally found the frequency it had always been waiting for. She stood beside it, hand resting on the stabilizer brace, while Mira recorded her last shots for the documentary's conclusion. The prism core shimmered inside its housing, casting soft light across the hangar walls. It didn't pulse like it used to, it glowed. Consistent. Centered. Ready. A week ago, Ren had been offered $5 million to bury this. Today, she turned down an even larger offer, not from Suits in Black, but from a tech startup who wanted to refine the platform and commercialize the concept. They didn't understand. This wasn't about profit. It was about proof. Proof that Roth's work had been real. That it had survived not just in metal and schematics, but in spirit, in intent, in the hands of someone willing to ask, "What is this?" instead of, "How do we own it?" She decided not to sell, not to hoard, and not to hide. Instead, Ren donated the entire propulsion system, engine, capsule, and all supporting materials to the Smithsonian Experimental Aviation Initiative under one condition: transparency. No secret vaults. No reclassification. No quiet removal from the archives. They agreed, but she didn't walk away. With the help of Mira, Javi, and a few more engineers who believed in the vision, she opened her own lab, not in DC, not in Silicon Valley, but right here, in the empty plains behind the old hangar. A converted garage, a wind tunnel salvaged from a military scrapyard, a workbench, a grinder, a coffee maker that still coughed on the first pour. They called it Rothworks. And on the front wall, framed in steel and backlit by a salvaged aviation beacon, hung the original schematic. At the bottom, Roth's handwritten message: "Don't fly it. Don't sell it. Finish it." Next to it, a small drawing of a red turbine with wings, flying through stars, the child's crayon letter. And beside that, a photo Ren had kept in her back pocket all these weeks of her and her father in front of his old shop, grease on their faces, her hand gripping a wrench that was clearly too heavy for her, and a look on her face like she already knew engines were more than machines. That afternoon, with the doors open and wind rolling in through the bay, Ren placed her hand on the new prototype, sleeker, smarter, made from the bones of Roth's original vision, but shaped by her own, and whispered, "You're not buried anymore." Then she hit the ignition. Not to lift off, not to escape, just to listen, and the machine answered.